Arrival at St. Anthony's. The wrought iron gates of St. Anthony's loomed larger than Marco had imagined, their Gothic spikes a silent warning. He'd expected ivy, and there was plenty, crawling over the honey-colored stone walls like grasping fingers. The air hummed with the drone of cicadas and the faint scent of incense, an olfactory assault that made him wrinkle his nose. This wasn't a college, it was a medieval fortress disguised as an educational institution. He lugged his battered suitcase, plastered with anarchist stickers, across the manicured lawn. Students strolled in pairs, their heads bent in hushed conversation, clad in preppy sweaters and khakis that screamed conformity. Marco, in his ripped jeans, band t-shirt, and Doc Martens, felt like a vibrant splash of graffiti on a pristine canvas. He smirked. Good. The registration office was a dimly lit chamber filled with the musty smell of old books and the clatter of typewriters. A stern-looking woman with a severe bun and spectacles perched behind a high counter, her gaze as sharp as a hawk's. He gave her his name, Marco Rossi, and she barely glanced up before handing him a packet of forms and a room key. No welcome, no smile, just cold efficiency. This place was already testing his patience. His dorm room was on the third floor of Aquinas Hall. The climb was arduous, the staircase narrow and winding. Each step felt like a deliberate act of penance. The room itself was small and Spartan, furnished with a single bed, a desk, and a wardrobe. A crucifix hung above the bed, staring down at him with silent judgment. He ripped it off the wall and tossed it into the top drawer. Later, drawn by the rumble of conversation, he ventured into the cafeteria. The cavernous room was packed with students, their voices creating a low, constant murmur. The aroma of institutional food hung heavy in the air, a blend of mystery meat and overcooked vegetables. He grabbed a tray and joined the queue, his eyes scanning the room. Cliques had already formed. Jocks clustered at one table, their laughter loud and boisterous. Nerds huddled at another, their conversation animated and intense. He found an empty seat at a table near the window and began to eat, picking at the tasteless food. The murmur of conversation around him grated on his nerves. It was all so polite. So predictable. He couldn't stand it. He slammed his fork down on his tray, the clatter silencing the table. All eyes turned to him. So, he announced, his voice ringing out across the cafeteria, I'm Marco Rossi, and I'm an atheist. Just thought you should all know, since I'm pretty sure this whole place is built on a foundation of superstitious nonsense. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Forks clattered, conversations died, and the air crackled with tension. He saw a few faces contorted in anger, others in shock, and a few, he noted with a flicker of satisfaction, in curiosity. He had their attention. I believe in reason, in science, in the power of the human mind, he continued, his voice rising in intensity. I don't believe in fairy tales, in miracles, or in some imaginary sky daddy who controls our every move. So, if anyone wants to debate the existence of God, I'm your guy. Silence descended once more, heavier and more oppressive than before. He held their gaze, daring them to challenge him. The initial shock was wearing off, replaced by a mixture of indignation and outrage. A burly football player stood up, his face flushed with anger. You can't talk like that here, he growled, his voice low and menacing. This is a Catholic college. Marco smirked. Exactly my point. He leaned back in his chair, a glint of defiance in his eyes. The battle had begun. The dare. The common room reeked of stale beer and youthful bluster, the air thick enough to choke on. Marco sank into the dilapidated sofa, its springs a painful reminder of its age. He nursed his tepid lager, the liquid offering scant relief from the dryness in his throat. Across from him, Leo, Sophia, and Elena were embroiled in yet another anarchistic debate, this one concerning Bakunin and Kropotkin. Marco was weary of it all, the endless rehashing of radical dogma. He yearned for action, something concrete to grapple with. Rossi, Leo interrupted the philosophical sparring, a playful smirk on his face, still peddling that atheist charade. Marco countered with a grin. Not a charade, Leo. A principle. Principles are dull, Sophia countered, swirling the last drops of her brew. We need validation. Something outrageous. Elena, usually the quietest of the group, perked up, a mischievous glint in her eyes. I have an idea. She paused, letting the anticipation build, a wicked curve to her lips. The chapel. The abandoned one. You know, with that ghastly Virgin Mary statue. Marco arched a brow. So, Elena lowered her voice to a conspiratorial murmur, you go in there and desecrate it. Prove to us you're truly unshackled from religious piety. The room fell silent. A jolt of adrenaline surged through Marco, a wicked thrill igniting his blood. It was foolish, reckless, utterly irresistible. He scanned their faces, each one a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Here it was, his chance to finally prove his mettle, to truly belong. I'm in, he breathed, the words barely audible. The walk across the desolate quad felt interminable. The chill night air, laced with the fragrance of damp soil and decaying leaves, prickled his skin. He felt their gazes boring into his back, a palpable weight of expectation and doubt. The chapel loomed ahead, a stark, Gothic shape etched against the luminous moon. A mournful groan emanated from the heavy oak door as he pushed it open, as if lamenting the impending sacrilege. Inside, the musty scent of incense and age hung heavy. Lunar rays filtered through the stained glass windows, painting the dusty pews with spectral shadows. He located her in the apse, the Virgin Mary, her plaster features fixed in a serene, almost taunting smile. Her pale blue robes shimmered ethereally in the dimness. A flicker of hesitation, a vestigial unease, fluttered within him. But the weight of his companion's expectations, the burning need for acceptance, propelled him forward. He advanced, step by measured step. He raised his foot, his pulse hammering in his ears. With a strangled yell, he lashed out. The hollow thud reverberated through the silent space. The statue teetered precariously, then toppled with a deafening crash, shattering into a score of fragments. A cloud of dust erupted, blanketing everything in a fine, white powder. He stood there, breathless, the sharp odor of plaster filling his lungs. He had done it. He had defied God, or at least, the symbol of his mother. A strange emptiness settled over him, the adrenaline rush already dissipating. He whirled around and bolted, the image of the decimated statue seared into his memory. Whispers of a curse. Marco snapped his pen in half. Not just a little crack, but a clean break right in the middle. Ink spurted, staining his knuckles a deep, angry blue. Damn it, he hissed, more annoyed than usual. It was his lucky pen, the one he'd used for every exam since it had become his lucky pen. Now, useless plastic. Rough start to the day, comrade, asked Anya, her eyebrows arched in mock sympathy. Marco just glared, wiping the ink on a discarded napkin. It's just a pen. Don't make a revolution out of it. He thought that was the end of it, a minor annoyance quickly forgotten. But the day seemed determined to prove him wrong. He'd crammed for the history test, knew the dates of the October Revolution better than his own birthday, but when the paper was placed in front of him, his mind went blank. Facts and figures swam before his eyes, refusing to coalesce. He guessed on most answers, a cold dread settling in his stomach. That afternoon, walking back from the library, he tripped. Not a dramatic, sprawling fall, but a clumsy stumble that sent his book scattering across the pavement. A collection of sympathetic clucks followed him as he scrambled to gather them. Then, later, in the cafeteria, he somehow managed to spill a whole tray of borscht down his front, the crimson soup splattering across his shirt. Seriously, Marco, what's going on with you today? Dmitri asked, cautiously backing away from the spreading stain. I don't know, Marco muttered, scrubbing at his shirt with a handful of napkins. Just, clumsy, I guess. But the whispers started that evening. He caught snippets of conversations as he walked through the dormitory hallway. Bad luck, always said, kicked it, didn't he? He rounded a corner and saw Anya and Dmitri huddled together, their voices dropping to a near inaudible murmur as he approached. They straightened up quickly, their faces flushed. Hey, Marco, Anya said, a little too brightly. We were just, discussing the upcoming May Day parade. Dmitri nodded vigorously. Yes, the parade. Very important. Marco narrowed his eyes. Right. The parade. So important you have to whisper about it in the hallway. He tried to brush it off, but the feeling of being watched, of being talked about, clung to him like the lingering scent of borscht. He went to bed early, hoping to shake off the day's string of mishaps. But even in sleep, he couldn't escape. He dreamed of shattered statues and disapproving eyes, the whispers turning into a chorus of accusations. The next morning, he awoke to find his alarm clock had stopped working. He was late for class, again. As he raced across the quad, he saw Anya and Dmitri by the statue of Lenin, their heads bowed in hushed conversation. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw Anya make the sign of the cross, quickly, furtively, before noticing him. Their eyes met. Fear, not sympathy, flickered in Anya's gaze. That's when Marco knew it wasn't just bad luck. They thought he was cursed. The storm. The afternoon sky, a canvas of purplish contusions, felt heavy with unspoken threat. Marco, oblivious by choice, wrestled with philosophical jargon at his desk, every nerve screaming about the looming midterm. Failure wasn't an option. He'd already worn out his welcome with his father, twice pleading for funds. Then came the thunder, a brutal, percussive detonation that shattered the silence of his basement dwelling. A glance at the barred window revealed a maelstrom of grays. Rain hammered the glass, a frenzied tattoo that morphed into an overwhelming din. Concentration proved impossible, the very air thrummed with the tempest's ferocity. A peculiar gurgling drew his gaze downward. A dark tide crept beneath the door, a sinister advance across the worn linoleum. Cursing, he shoved back his chair. This place was a pit. The landlord's renovation promises were as empty as Marco's wallet. He scrambled to salvage his textbooks, stacking them precariously. The water rose with alarming speed, threatening the power outlet. Unplugging his laptop, his lifeline, a relic of a former life, he perched it atop the teetering pile. Within moments, ankle-deep water churned with debris. He watched, aghast, as his textbooks dissolved into pulpy masses. The laptop, despite his efforts, toppled with a sickening plop into the murky depths. No, he roared, the sound swallowed by the storm's fury. He slogged through the encroaching flood, snatching up the device. Water streamed from its casing. A futile attempt to power it on met with a stubbornly blank screen. Panic constricted his throat. He was marooned, utterly alone, surrounded by ruin. Home felt a million miles away, and his family, indifferent. He'd burned bridges, dismissed beliefs. He'd craved independence, a self-forged destiny, but now felt dwarfed, exposed to forces beyond his control. Perched on the edge of his soaked bed, shivering, the tempest outside echoed the storm within. He'd scoffed at faith, deified logic, and now he was drowning, not just in water, but in a sea of despair. Eyes shut, a solitary tear cut a path down his cheek. For the first time in what felt like forever, he was completely, irrevocably alone. The defiance that had fueled him, the certainty that had defined him, buckled under the deluge. A word escaped his lips, a relic from a distant past, a word that felt foreign and clumsy: help. Seeking shelter. The wind howled a mournful dirge, tearing at Marco's threadbare jacket. Rain lashed down, blurring the already indistinct shapes of the buildings around him. He was hopelessly lost, the cheap map he'd bought from a street vendor now a soggy, useless pulp in his pocket. Each gust of wind seemed to whisper accusations, reminders of his arrogance, his self-assured pronouncements about the irrelevance of faith. Now, faith, or anything that even resembled shelter, seemed like a lifeline. He remembered the church. St. Jude's. He'd walked past it 100 times, scoffing at the ornate facade, the archaic symbolism. He'd even, in a fit of drunken bravado with his friends, mimed throwing a rock at the stained glass windows. Now, the memory felt like a brand on his skin. St. Jude's was his only option. He hesitated at the wrought iron gates, their intricate design twisted into vaguely menacing shapes by the storm. The wind shrieked through the metalwork, sounding like tortured souls. He shivered, not entirely from the cold. Swallowing his pride, and a lump of pure, unadulterated fear, he pushed the gates open. They groaned in protest, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the tempest. The church doors were surprisingly heavy, crafted from dark, weathered wood. He pushed against them, the hinges squealing like rusty hinges. He slipped inside. The sudden silence was almost deafening. The storm still raged outside, but here, within the thick stone walls, a strange calm prevailed. The air was cool, damp, and heavy with the scent of incense and old wood. A few candles flickered in the sanctuary, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. He stood just inside the entrance, dripping rainwater onto the worn stone floor. A sense of profound unease settled over him. It wasn't the fear he'd anticipated, the dread of divine retribution. It was something else, something akin to peace. An alien sensation. A lone figure knelt in one of the pews, head bowed in prayer. Marco averted his gaze, suddenly self-conscious. He didn't belong here. He was an intruder, a trespasser in a world he'd actively rejected. He moved further inside, seeking the shadows. He needed to be unseen, unheard. He scanned the interior, his eyes drawn to the alcove where the Virgin Mary statue had stood. Now, it was just an empty space, a gaping void where something sacred had once resided. The emptiness seemed to mock him, a silent indictment of his actions. He stared at the vacant pedestal, the flickering candlelight exaggerating the starkness of its absence. A strange feeling washed over him. Not triumph, not vindication, but something closer to regret. He wrapped his arms around himself, trying to ward off the chill that penetrated his bones. He was seeking shelter from the storm, but he suspected he was seeking something more. Something he couldn't name, something he didn't understand. He was cold, wet, and utterly alone, trapped between the storm outside and the unsettling silence within. Stories of miracles. Amber and rose light fractured through the stained glass, painting the hushed church. Marco, hunched in a rear pew, breathed in the unfamiliar, cloying aroma of incense. The Virgin's placid marble countenance seemed to watch him with silent reproach. 48 hours. 48 hours since the relapse. The memory, both distant echo and present torment, looped in his mind. A soft cough sliced through his inner turmoil. A woman, etched with the chronicles of age and devotion, stood beside him. A simple gray habit framed her face, and kind eyes crinkled in a gentle smile. Troubled, friend. Her voice, a mere breath, held a subtle quaver. No, Marco muttered. Just thinking. A weighty occupation, she observed, settling beside him with a soft whisper of fabric. I'm Sister Agnes. A curt nod was his only reply. Marco. She didn't pry. Instead, her gaze drifted to the statue. She's witnessed much. Joy, despair. Wonders. Marco's inner voice sneered. Wonders. Delusion. A crutch for the weak. As if sensing his cynicism, Sister Agnes's tone remained steady. Years ago, a storm imprisoned a fisherman at sea for 3 days. His wife, Maria, beseeched Our Lady without ceasing. On the 4th day, he stumbled through that very portal, soaked, depleted, but alive. He claimed to have followed a beacon, brighter than any celestial body. She paused, allowing the tale to resonate. And Sophia, a child born with a deformed spine, was deemed unable to walk. Her parents brought her here daily, their prayers constant. Then, one morning, she simply rose. She walked, unassisted, to the statue, arms outstretched. Marco's jaw tightened. Coincidence? The power of belief. He knew the rational explanations. He dissected them. Yet, the stories, delivered with such quiet certitude, nibbled at his armor of disbelief. Sister Agnes turned her gaze to him, her eyes pools of profound empathy. Sometimes, she murmured, the true miracles are not grand spectacles, but gentle tendrils of hope unfurling in the darkest recesses of the soul. She reached out, her fingers briefly encompassing his hand. Her skin felt cool as parchment, yet her grip held a surprising strength. She understands sorrow, Marco. She offers solace, not condemnation. He stared at their joined hands, his own seeming lost within hers, the weight of her words a tangible pressure. The incense, thick and sweet, grew almost unbearable, filling him with a suffocating sensation. His throat constricted, and a wave of searing shame engulfed him, the intensity unlike anything prior. He yearned to lash out, to dispute, to negate everything she'd said. But the words remained trapped, a strangled sob his only response. He snatched his hand away, burying his face in his palms, the phantom image of a shattered life burning behind his closed eyelids. The notebook. A musty fragrance, a mingling of beeswax and aged wood, permeated the sanctuary. Marco, kneeling in the last row, felt the pew's unyielding surface press into his kneecaps. This wasn't planned, none of it was. The violated statue, the shame of expulsion, the raw disappointment etched on his father's face, a collective weight that constricted his chest, stealing his breath. A ragged inhale caught in his throat. He dug his knuckles into his eyes, a futile attempt to staunch the onrush of tears. Not since childhood had he wept. Tears were weakness, a lesson hammered home by his father. Yet here, engulfed by the cathedral's echoing silence, surrounded by the ghosts of supplications, that weakness felt unavoidable. How idiotic he'd been. An obstinate, self-important fool. He had imagined himself making some heroic gesture, battling, what? He couldn't even articulate it now. He swiped at his wet face with his jacket sleeve, the coarse material offering little comfort. A choked sob broke free, shattering the stillness. Utterly adrift, he felt around for his backpack on the floor. Beneath the textbooks, past the grubby cigarettes and greasy sandwich, his fingers encountered something foreign. He retrieved it. A slender, time-worn notebook, its leather cover a shade of near black. He had no recollection of packing it. Heart hammering a frantic tattoo against his ribs, he opened it. Elegant, flowing script filled the first page. His grandmother's. He hadn't seen her handwriting in what felt like a lifetime. Marco, my dearest boy, if you are reading this, then I am gone. I always knew you possessed a rebellious spirit, a mind that questioned all. Cherish that fire, Marco. But remember that even the brightest flames need fuel and air. Do not allow it to consume you. His vision blurred once more. He swallowed, pressing on. Life will hurl its share of burdens, Caro. It will try to break you. But within you resides a fortitude you haven't yet discovered. A strength inherited through generations of Rossis. A strength forged in love and resilience. Never hesitate to seek solace. Never abandon hope. Even when shadows loom, a spark of light awaits discovery. I love you beyond measure. Nanina. The words swam before him. Clutching the notebook to his chest, the cool leather a balm against his skin, the tears took on a different quality. Less despair, more a fragile, nascent hope. He glanced upward at the stained glass Madonna, bathed in ethereal light. Miracles. He wasn't a believer, not really. Yet in that instant, enveloped by the aroma of incense and the echo of his grandmother's voice, a fragile sense of serenity descended. The church felt less confining, more a sanctuary. Perhaps he wasn't quite as lost as he believed. Maybe a path forward still existed. Repairing the damage. Sunlight, fractured and weak, struggled through the stained glass window depicting the Annunciation, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the debris-strewn floor. Dust motes danced in the pale beams, illuminating the chaos left by the storm. Marco coughed, the scent of damp plaster and shattered glass thick in the air. Sister Agnes, her face etched with weariness, was already at work, gently picking up shards of colored glass. "Good morning, Marco," she said, her voice a little raspy. "Thank you for coming." He shifted uncomfortably. I wanted to help." The words felt clumsy, inadequate. He knelt beside her, his own hands hesitant at first. The cool glass was smooth against his skin, a stark contrast to the sharp edges that threatened to cut. "Every little bit helps," Sister Agnes said, her smile radiating a quiet strength. She told him stories of previous storms, of the resilience of the community, of the enduring power of faith. He listened, not truly believing, but strangely comforted by the rhythm of her voice and the shared task. They worked in silence for a while, the only sound the soft clinking of glass and the gentle hum of the nearby highway. Marco found a rhythm in the cleaning, a focus that quieted the turmoil in his head. Each piece of glass he cleared felt like a small act of penance, a step towards repairing not just the church, but something within himself. He swept up fallen plaster, careful not to disturb the delicate frescoes on the walls. He straightened overturned benches, feeling the weight of the wood in his hands, the solid reality of the physical world. He discovered a small, intricately carved wooden bird, its wing broken. Sister Agnes sighed. It was part of the nativity scene. The children always loved it. Marco carefully picked it up, turning it over in his hand. He had never noticed the small details before, the artistry and care that had gone into creating this place. "Maybe I can fix it," he mumbled, surprising himself. "That would be wonderful, Marco." He found some wood glue and carefully pieced the wing back together, holding it in place until it set. It wasn't perfect, but it was whole again. He handed it back to Sister Agnes. As he stood, stretching his aching back, he saw Sofia Rodriguez standing hesitantly in the doorway. Her eyes, wide and troubled, flicked between him and the damaged statue of the Virgin Mary, now covered with a simple white cloth. "Sofia," Sister Agnes said gently, "come in, child. We can use another pair of hands." Sofia stepped inside, her gaze still fixed on Marco. There was a mixture of sadness and curiosity in her expression. "Marco," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the traffic outside. "Why?" He didn't meet her eyes. I don't know," he muttered, turning back to the task at hand. He picked up another handful of broken glass, the sharp edges digging into his skin. He hadn't expected forgiveness, but the weight of her disappointment was heavier than any accusation. The sun, momentarily obscured by a cloud, left the church in shadow, reflecting the murk in his own heart. He knelt again, scrubbing furiously at a stubborn stain on the floor, hoping to erase not just the dirt, but the memory of his actions. He was far from absolution but felt, oddly, that he was finally on the right path. A change of heart. The mingled aroma of wax polish and aged timber became a constant. It wasn't piety that drew Marco to the old church, but an odd, nascent sense of place. Prayer remained absent. Instead, he occupied the rearmost pew, fingers tracing patterns on the worn, cool wood, absorbing the low hum of the service, the priest's cadence pronouncements, the communal sighs rippling through the assembled faithful. Afterward, he assisted Sister Agnes, rearranging seating and sweeping dust motes from the floor. Her movements possessed a tired elegance, her face a roadmap of enduring strength. One Sunday, she remarked, her voice a gravelly murmur, "You're a fixture now, Marco." He shrugged, avoiding her perceptive gaze. "Someone has to tidy up." "Indeed," she conceded, a ghost of a smile gracing her lips. "But others could." "Why you, specifically?" He hesitated, the truth felt too tangled to unravel. It gives me something to do," he finally offered. Agnes nodded slowly, her eyes holding depths he couldn't fathom. "Purpose is a powerful gift. Don't dismiss it so readily." One afternoon, Sofia intercepted him, a stack of hymnals cradled in his arms. Her customary reserve appeared heightened. "Why this?" she asked, her voice soft as falling snow. He paused, weighing his response. "Does it truly matter?" "It does to me," she countered, her dark eyes searching his soul. You were once so full of venom," he finished. She nodded, a bare inclination of her head. "I still carry that rage," he confessed. "But I'm reaching for something different, too." He kept silent about the lingering nightmares, the unnerving stillness that had settled upon him after that night, the persistent feeling of unseen eyes tracking his every move. He also kept to himself the guilt, a relentless undercurrent in his thoughts. Sofia didn't press him for further details. Instead, she stood there, assessing him. Her mere presence, surprisingly, offered a strange solace. He learned she taught hymns and scripture lessons to the youngest children each Sunday. He observed her patience, the gentle magnetism that drew smiles from even the most withdrawn youngsters. He discovered a depth within her that had previously eluded him, an inner fortitude that resonated within him. He began actively listening to the sermons, not seeking divine revelation, but focusing on the narratives. Tales of absolution, of empathy, of undying hope. He began to value the strength inherent in belief, independent of his own lack of faith. He witnessed firsthand how faith could forge unbreakable bonds, building a supportive and compassionate community. He realized respect wasn't synonymous with agreeing with someone's convictions, but acknowledging their inherent right to those beliefs. He saw the succor the church provided to the elderly women, their fingers gliding over rosaries, the consolation extended to grieving families. He saw tangible acts of kindness, the seeds of hope being sown and nurtured. One evening, as he walked, streetlights sculpting elongated figures on the sidewalk, Marco reflected on his transformation. He had come to the church a hardened skeptic, defiant and bitter. He remained an atheist, perhaps, but the anger had begun to dissipate. He was learning, evolving, reshaping himself. The Virgin Mary statue incident still lingered in his memory, but it no longer defined him. It was a pivot, a spark igniting a process he couldn't yet fully comprehend, but one that felt essential. He wasn't beseeching a supernatural intervention. He was mourning the wasted years, the burden of hate, and the promise of a better self.